Well, thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. You know, every serious athlete, from a child to a pro, is looking for an edge over their competitor. Rapid advances in medicine, psychology, technology have provided players, coaches, and doctors with new understandings of skill, power, endurance, stats, and the mind. Enhanced, the new documentary series on ESPN Plus, explores all of these subjects, from the benefits to the possible problems. Let's take a look.
Enhancing human performance has been part of the human condition since the beginning of time. Romans who ran the marathon were running barefoot for a while, and then they discovered shoes could help them run a little bit faster.
For years, athletes have been asked to give everything to their sport.
It's time to start asking, what do people want from sports at a very basic level?
Data, it's at the Wild West phase. It's really just getting started.
We use heart rate monitors, GPS.
They're giving away a huge amount of bioinformation.
It does become a sci-fi thing. Are we predicting how this person is going to think?
Are steroids good or bad? That's the question.
Gene therapy is absolutely where things will move.
You can get the muscle to grow by 50% in 2 weeks.
Side effects may include cancer, liver failure, seizure, anxiety, or death.
It's just there for legality purposes.
You have to learn to hold your finger in the candle flame and just keep it there and keep it there and keep it there.
Let days pain, day success.
Are we doing enough for athletes recovery? Is that a joke? No.
Neuroscience will allow people to break through physical barriers.
3 in a row, way to go.
I don't care how good you are, I make you better.
To be great, you have to be fearless.
It blew my mind when I tried it.
I believe in the science. Don't ask me the technical words and all these things, but I feel it.
Progress.
If we're not trying to be better, we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing?
We're sort of evolving into two classes of human being: enhanced human beings and unenhanced human beings.
Who knows what the potential of a human is? And so why not find out?
Everybody, please welcome filmmakers Jesse Sweet and Chai Vasarhelyi, and senior producer for ESPN, Erin Leyden. Thank you so much for being here. Congratulations on this documentary series, which is fascinating and kind of shocking at the same time. My own personal reaction to it is of the shocked dystopian nightmare that we seem to be driving towards at times, not just in sports, but like everything else in our world. Sports are a kind of microcosm for how technological advances are shaping human life in so many different ways. Erin, you're a senior producer at ESPN. I'm sure this was brought to you by Gibney and Co., the documentary production outfit. What was ESPN's thoughts on making something like this?
Well, I think ESPN Films, we typically, our big series is 30 for 30 film series, so we're used to doing more, one-topic films. I think, we've been doing that for almost 10 years now, so we wanted to kind of think outside of that and started to think about docuseries. Some of my colleagues, Libby Geist, the executive producer at ESPN, she had been talking to Alex Gibney about this topic of enhanced athletes, or just what athletes are doing to kind of push the edges of performance. And so they started talking about this series a couple years ago. They developed some ideas and all the different themes of ways athletes are trying to kind of achieve these great performances. And, we were excited to do a 6-part docuseries, something a little bit different for us, to really get at a topic in a lot of different ways.
One thing I've always loved about ESPN's docs, whether it's 30 for 30 or the O.J. Simpson, the Made in America documentary O.J. Simpson, is that I feel like ESPN, while a sports network whose bottom line is primarily driven by sports, they are unafraid to look at critically the way representation in sports affects the subjects of their documentaries. And I think this as well is no different, just in terms of how the sports industrial complex in some ways exacerbates potentially a lot of the problems that are circling around these advancements. Can you talk about those conversations?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, whether it's in, what's happening in youth sports or just with different leagues and their policies on, performance-enhancing drugs, or just the money involved with all of this and the technology. I think one thing that's great about the series is we are able to ask some, pretty provocative questions about what's happening, and is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it ethical? Or what are the ethics involved as we enter into this new territory where there's just more, whether it's, gadgets or training methods, there's just more available to athletes to take advantage of to better their performance, and just where are the lines that we're drawing as to what's fair and what's not fair.
And it's kind of like the Wild West right now in terms of where the lines are. There's very little regulation.
I think so. I mean, I think especially with something like steroids, there's always been a game of kind of catch up where, the people kind of are always trying to break the rules, and the leagues and, entities are trying to kind of stay a step ahead of them. But yeah, I think athletes are always going to be motivated to just kind of find out where that edge is and just keep pushing and pushing. So I don't know if it might always be the wild, wild west, or if there'll ever be, a way to kind of like harness in people's desire to do better.
Jessie Chai, it's a 6-part series. The two of you represent 3 parts yourself. Jessie, algorithm, and Chai, skill and power, correct? Talk a little bit about what directed you towards those specific subjects. Let's just start there. What directed you towards skill and power?
I think that you guys thought I'd be interested in it, which I was. And it's actually, just to go back to, so power looks at performance-enhancing drugs and also the technologies available to enhance our performance. And I have to say, like, the most interesting part of it for me was understanding that for athletes, this is a matter of survival. Like, this is a matter of, like, not only your financial well-being, but it's also that if you're not doing it, but the other guy's doing it, they're gonna clobber you. And that was kind of like making it personal and kind of demystifying this thing that we generally think is wrong, even though there are many, many positive applications in terms of recovery, in terms of recovery primarily, or medicine. So, I mean, it was just interesting to, like, delve into it, especially as a parent, especially as someone who loves sports, and ask these kind of serious questions around the sports we love.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to performance-enhancing drugs, so often we refer to it as cheating, as if these highly competitive fields where people are making money in a highly competitive tiered-based system that we live in are not going to do whatever they can to find the upper hand to just sustain themselves, as you said. We toss them aside as if they are the bad apples rather than a sort of product of an entire system. And I think algorithm talks about that a lot, especially when it comes to an instance of hacking the algorithms of, I think it was the Houston Rockets, right? Excuse me.
Yeah, it was the Houston Rockets. What had happened, the thumbnail sketch is that, it's like anything, like to your point, these are such competitive individuals and organizations that once someone does something and it wins a championship, everyone has to copy that or they're going to be left behind. And so what is cheating kind of depends on what the rule is. And sometimes someone's so successful, they have to, make a rule. We're not going to let you stand in the paint anymore for more than 3 seconds because Will Chamberlain got 100 points in a game. So now that's cheating, right? So once someone gets there, it gets regulated. And in terms of data, everyone started trying to build up it was arms race, right? Whoever had the best data was going to get new insights and see things you couldn't see with the human eye. And the Cardinals went all in on this, and they won a championship. And then the Rockets Astros. We filmed with the Rockets too. Then the Astros poached their GM, Jeff Lunau, and what happened was he basically was going to recreate the same database he created in St. Louis, and he brought most of the team with him, but one guy stayed behind, and he said, I bet he was kind of getting jealous that Houston kind of got all this attention. They were on the Sports Illustrated cover. Now they're the sexy new team. They have the best data. And so the guy in St. Louis wanted to say, I wonder if he's using any of our ideas. Not that he stole their data, but the big idea, and not to get too wonky, was that they wanted to have a way to compare apples to oranges. So if you were looking at a player in Dominican Republic versus a high school kid in Iowa versus a college player versus a minor league player, they're going against different pitchers and all these different things. And so they brought in all these NASA scientists and MIT economists to try to say, how can we take all the noise out and compare people from these different domains? And they had a system they thought did that. And he wanted to say, did they steal our special sauce and bring it to Houston? And what happened was, like most great hacks, it's really kind of a idiotic way of leaving the door open, was the Houston Chronicle ran a paper on this new ground control database this guy brought to Houston. And they took a picture of him, and he said, the photographer came and said, can we take a picture of you at the computer? And he said, yeah, and it had the website domain name in the picture. And the guy in St. Louis saw the thing, and he goes, you know what? I bet he didn't change his password very much. And his password, his name's Jeff Lunau. In St. Louis, it was Lunau123, and he tried all these things. And in Houston, it was Lunau1234. And they were able to hack into the best database in all of baseball, and for 6 months, get an insider's look at all their inside negotiations, the data they were building up, all this sort of thing. And again, is it cheating or stupidity? You know, the guy did end up in jail for 4 years.
In this particular instance, it was cheating according to the federal government.
Well, and it's interesting that, you know, we get into this in the show, people really, the courts came down hard on this, probably harder than Major League Baseball wanted them to, because they didn't view it as, you know, they're just scuffing the baseball or they're, you know, stealing bases early or signaling, you know, unfairly. They saw it as intellectual property. And so they applied the laws that if, you know, Pepsi hacked into Coke and stole their secret formula, or if Microsoft hacked into Facebook, you know, something like that, they viewed it as an intellectual property crime. And so the general manager who actually did the hack from St. Louis is in jail now. And he got a 4-year sentence, and I think he has a year left in it.
Now, one of the things that I think both your episode about algorithms and your episode about skill tap into that seems so dangerous is the removal of a certain amount of spirit and heart from the sports themselves, in the sense that with skill, they're talking about nature versus nurture a lot of the time, and they're talking about specific genes that they can now kind of review and see whether or not an athlete could be as good as they hope just based off of their genes as a child. And with yours, they're having these they're having children or potential prospects doing sort of pattern recognition and removing any of the sense of how they actually play on the field in a lot of ways, and just sort of calculating exactly how numerically they could potentially pan out over the course of a season, which in some ways is kind of disheartening when it comes to sports, because you do want a little bit of heart in your sports. No, you do want everybody out there, not because they are robotically proficient, but because there's something special about their soul to a degree. Did you feel that at all while you were documenting that?
I mean, you're raising like...
Feel my analysis?
I mean, you're raising one of the core questions of the series, which is, what does constitute sports? Like, what are the boundaries we as humans would like to place upon like our sports that protect competition, that protect the spirit of it, protect heart? You know, for my episode, like, I think the genetic stuff is still just at the very beginning, and there's not that much they can tell. They do know that, let's say, there are certain genetic mutations that come from certain places in the world just from repeated exposure and from evolution. But, you know, I don't know. It's what was most kind of scary for me was to see the lengths that an individual go to, like how
lengths that parents would go to.
Yes, but and like speaking of Cole, who's like the young pitcher who's in the skill episode, in the power episode.
No skill.
The skill episode. Yeah. Excuse me. Who has to have this arm surgery at the age of 16, and because that's where he is. He's throwing that many balls, and then he's pursuing a career in the major leagues, and like it's a big deal.
And goes to one of the doctors,
top,
the institute
the Andrews Institute.
The Andrews Institute, which is, you know, they treat like the top athletes in the world. So here we have 16-year-old kids kind of seeking the same treatment that, you know, a professional athlete would get.
Because they're already on a course, or you know, attempting to be on a course towards the majors. Real fast, one of the things about your episode, and we're talking about genes, that sort of floored me out of my seat was this company that is attempting to... Can you just explain what this company was? That
well, basically
it's not a scam.
I mean, it's like 23andMe. Like, they're coming and they're taking a swab, and you send it back, and you're supposed to find out whether your child has got soccer potential. Right? There's very little like long-term research into this, and they're trying to measure if he's going to run faster. Yeah.
I think that's one of the big problems. I mean, you said it's like the Wild West, maybe more a little Westworld in there too, with the kind of creepiness factor that you don't know, because it's not medical, it's not regulated, it's not peer reviewed. You don't know what someone's selling you, right? Because a company sets up and they want to sell a product, and who knows if they'll be here in 5 years when you find out if what they're telling you based on this algorithm is true. So they're going to, you know, gather a bunch of data on an athlete and go to a team and say, here's what it tells us about his likelihood to perform well in this situation or do this and that. The team doesn't look inside the algorithm. The player doesn't. There's a certain amount of, if they can convince you it's true, which sounds like snake oil to a lot of people. And like the people making the decisions are still, you know, we haven't gotten to the point. Every team does have some data analysts, but a lot of the people making the decision and coaching staffs didn't come out of, didn't take a stats class in college. They,
Isn't there a team though that you document that has completely gotten rid of their regular scouts and now
that's
simply
the
focused
Astros.
on data?
At the end, they said that they just got rid of all the scouts and we're just gonna, gather all the data and crunch the numbers, and that's gonna tell us how people are gonna perform in different situations. Which, to your point, I think there is a certain soul-numbing fear in that. I mean, we do watch sports because they have a moral value, I think, right? We call someone a good sport, right? That means that that's a comment on someone's character. That's, but I think at the high level, people are so passionate about it. It's not like, when someone's in a Super Bowl, they're just going to be dead behind the eyes. But my bigger fear is that it's going to weed out the kind of unexpected, miraculous players. Like, are you going to get Muggsy Bogues? Are you going to get these people who are hotballs but give us some of our favorite moments because, they're defying all the odds just by being in there, but somehow through luck and, fearlessness and skill and grit that they manage to make these amazing plays. Think about how many of the defining moments in sports history are the ones that you couldn't predict. And algorithms are all about making sports something you can predict. And so I think there is a conflict there.
I would even say late bloomers too, because if so much is being done with like early stats and identifying who's on a certain track or, who are going to be the elite performers, you're going to miss a whole class of people that are just,
Right. In regards to baseball, there's minor leaguers or DH hitters or potential pinch hitters or something that could come in late and suddenly blow everybody away. I think, like as a Red Sox fan, I think of someone like David Ortiz, who's like this big first baseman that really no one saw coming early on, and then he just started hitting home run after home run after home run. But if it wasn't a home run, he couldn't really hit for anything. So there's no way he would really make the stats game. I don't know that for sure. Don't hold me to that.
Well, a good example is CJ McCollum, who's like the subject of the skill episode, where when he was in high school, when he was graduating from high school, he was 5'11". Like he would end up growing 3 inches in college, and go on to become like the great shooting guard for the Portland Trail Blazers. But if you were to apply it, he was too short to play in the NBA. But through this, and I think the whole skill episode that really looks at how the nature versus nurture debate has evolved, it's very tempting to be like, clearly it's going to be all nature, and we can now find it out in the genes. We will understand what's going to be the future. But like what we found in looking at the episode really was it's this perfect combination of the two. It's having the right mentors. It's having the right teachers who will fine-tune your training to your skills, and having the people who would inspire you to work really hard. So, I was like, on one hand, looking at this like new age, like futuristic dystopian idea, and then at the same time quite encourage that skill, like the idea of nurturing, teaching, still plays such an important role.
When you were making your episodes, how often did you feel like sports, athletics were a kind of microcosm for how so much of a highly competitive society is functioning?
All the time. I think with data in particular, especially like I was making it while Cambridge Analytica was happening, right? And that it just seems like the sports is the canary in the coal mine for what's the line between individual privacy and the efficiencies that are brought to you by gathering all this data, right?
Right, because specifically in your episode, without giving too much away, there is that idea that one team could sell a particular athlete's data, or they could use that data to not renew their contract, essentially.
And it hasn't. There hasn't been a collective bargaining agreement since a lot of these tracking devices have been started using. So there aren't strict guidelines. So it's kind of like what any team can get away with. And as you said, who owns the data? So sometimes they don't know. Sometimes there's a third company that gathers it. Could they sell it to someone else? And then there's all the privacy issues and safety issues about where's the data actually being stored. Is it on a server in Crimea that's now been annexed into Russia and Putin? These are real issues. Who reads their iTunes agreement anymore, right? You just click yes and data goes off somewhere. And then there's also, it's all being transmitted, through airwaves, because on a sport, someone's wearing a mobile device. So if someone in a stadium has a way of capturing that data, they too could gather it. So it's like all these things about who owns the data and then what you can do with it. I think, again, Cambridge Analytica was a big wake up in the Facebook with the election that people might be looking at our data for ulterior motives, right? That we are clicking on the survey on Facebook because we want to know if we're a cat person or a dog person, but someone can look at that and do a, what they call it, psychogenic map and figure out how to manipulate us. So, I mean, it's like if that's what's happening.
Which polarized political opinion based off of cat or dog.
Yeah, but if you have something that's measuring your heart data and your breathing rate, and think about what that could do. Could someone sell that to an insurance company and that's going to impact your premiums down the line? You don't need to be a student of, Black Mirror to think about all the ways this can be turned against the person who sees a benefit originally.
Can you talk a little bit about how in your skill episode that is discussed? I mean, that comes up when we're talking about children in the way. I mean, especially one person is talking about they see people who want their children to be the best athletes for the purpose of possibly getting a college scholarship because college tuition has risen, 8 times the amount of inflation, he says. So many parents are like, you're going to be the best athlete possible so we can get you into a good school, which seems, doesn't just have to do with sports. It seems like getting the kid into the right nursery school, having the right tutors, SATs, that whole track that we've created.
I mean, returning to Cole, this young pitcher, I mean, he's a very good example of this. Like you ask most young athletes, like, why are you willing to go to these lengths? And there's like a college scholarship. But the reality is 1% of them get that college scholarship. Like, it's impossible. And yeah, I mean, I think we saw that in a big way where people are motivated in this very competitive way. And what does that mean? Like, does Cole enjoy what he does? I mean, I think he does. I think he loves pitching. But even I think when I asked him about it, he's like, I wanted to be on TV. I think it says a lot about our society.
Erin, were these topics that you expected to come up within these episodes? Was this sort of layer of how our society functions outside of just sports something that you expected to see?
I think in the early discussions there was, a suspicion that sports was kind of like you said, a microcosm for some bigger things going on in the world, and we always kind of hope our films and projects kind of have a little bit like of a life beyond the sports world and speak to larger issues. But I think all the directors kind of dug things up in interesting ways. And, it's not even always in there like overtly. It's just things that come to mind when you're listening, you're hearing certain stories and you think like, oh, that has a parallel, whether it's with like banking information or, Facebook or, I think even just like that desire to get better, like that, whether it's at your job or, in school or at a sport, I think it's just like there's themes out there that resonate. I think that's what's so interesting too about the series too, why people are doing why are we trying to become so enhanced? Like there is just like this desire to be the best, I think that so many people carry. And just that helps explain the willingness to kind of do some of these things that aren't proven. I mean, I think of the SARMS episode where this kid is, on YouTube just ingesting who knows what into his body. But there's like this, I guess, a hope that it's going to make them bigger and stronger and famous.
It does help. I mean, SARMs help. But the long-term effects are unclear. And this also, I think is one of the most important parts about the Power episode was it looks at how basically we failed the, performance-enhancing drug kind of world, in that by making them illegal, by categorizing them as a category 3 drug, we pushed everything underground. So they're not even doctors looking at this stuff. No one knows the long-term effects. So if a kid's taking steroids now, it's probably come from China, arrived, and he's got to bake it, cook it down in his basement, and then he injects it. Like, terrifying. Yeah.
People are going to do it.
Yeah, and a lot of people do it. And actually, it's not who we think it's doing it. People are doing it really just to look better. It's not so much in sports. Like in sports, it's like a cat and mouse game where you just have to understand the science, and you are always kind of one step ahead of the testers.
There was such a scare tactic around steroids as well. I remember in the late 80s and early 90s, as like a kid growing up, there were many after-school specials and many sitcoms, storylines devoted to the wrestler doing steroids and going crazy and destroying a locker room or something, or yelling at his parents. One episode that I loved is the Mind Guru episode, where this character Wim Hof is covered, who I had never heard of before, but he's this incredible character who swims in ice and has essentially declared himself like a new disease immunity or something along those lines.
Yeah,
Can you
they
talk
like
about it?
pump like E. coli into him or something, and he was able to resist the infection, I think. Yeah, it's all about these like breathing exercises and resistance. He trains by going into really cold water, like ice baths or actual like frozen water, and he's able to kind of regulate his body and get into, I think he calls it either like the, Zen or like the flow.
Flow state.
The flow state, and he's saying like he's helping athletes to train to kind of get into the state where you kind of like are calm and you're not gonna, it's good for clutch moments where you can perform. It's just a way of controlling your body, and it's all through these. That one's kind of interesting because it's not using technology as opposed to in the rest of the episode in Mind Gurus, there's a lot of gadgets and things that are kind of like tapping it like neurotransmitters and.
But I think what's interesting about that, in the same way that the episodes that we've been talking about are interesting, is that mindfulness is such a huge component of the business world right now, as well as the athletic world. And so often it was initially meant to sort of calm people and bring them down, but it's now being used not once again, but it's being used as this tool to give people a competitive edge over people, whether it's in business or in sports, which is just fascinating to me.
We actually had one of my colleagues at ESPN who worked on the series in the development phase, went and did the Wim Hof seminar. I don't know what you call it, camp. Like he went to Poland, like in the middle of the winter, and went and climbed a mountain. Like
Do you like it?
How's this flow?
He did. He's been stepping it up at work. I don't know. No, he said he sat in the ice bath, did the breathing exercises, all the So
Let's get some questions from our audience. Who's the question? Right here.
Hi. I was just wondering, were there any topics that you guys would have loved to touch upon, but you never had the chance to put into the final product for this show?
I think there were just, in the hour, I think data analytics is such a big thing, and like you were saying, it touches on so many aspects of our life that there are things I would have liked to go a little further on in terms of like, there's a debate happening in the legal world about when you have electronic devices, who controls them. And it might seem like an obvious thing, right? We've always had this distinction that you're a person and that's your machine, and that it's like it's not part of your body. But there was actually a Supreme Court case in 2014, and they started this thing called cyborg law. And the idea is that the police can't just search your cell phone because that's essentially part of your body. And Justice Roberts said, police can't treat it like it's something they find in your car, because if a Martian came down from Mars and looked at humans, they would think the cell phone was part of your body. And there's this whole thing about, there are more implants. Who owns the data in the implant? Like there was this one kind of crazy story about a woman who had a pacemaker, and she was a computer coder, and there was a glitch in the pacemaker, and it would shock her 2 times a day. Not enough to hurt her, but just like a little shock. And she went to the people who made the pacemaker and said, I want the underlying code so I can rewrite the code. And they said, no, you can't have it. And she said, well, it's in my heart. And they said, it doesn't matter, it's our product. And it went to the courts, and they said, even though you implanted it, it's still the property of someone else. And so I think there's all these debates again about, as we get into more implanting devices to track people's movements, because they always offer, benefits early, that you have an implant and it tells your house to turn the air conditioning on before you get in and all this stuff. But what happens when that starts shocking your heart? That there's this kind of, breakdown of the traditional boundary between what's your body is personal and what's under your control and what's outside it isn't. So some of those issues we kind of touched on, but you could go far deeper on.
I think time for one more.
Hi. So we know like baseball is pretty popular with performance-enhancing drugs, but are there any other sports that are, equally as popular or even more so?
Well, cycling is probably the most publicly understood. Yes. Well, I think what's unexpected is that UFC has made it their mission to basically eradicate performance-enhancing drugs in their program, and saying that it could kill one of these players, like one of these fighters, if the other guy is on him. So, I came away from doing the research on this episode understanding that performance-enhancing drugs are everywhere. And it's really, we need to think about how we look at them. We need to think about how we legislate them. I think the Congress spent a day debating whether to categorize them as a Category 3 drug or not.
Congress.
I know, no, but it's shocking. Like, I mean, it's amazing because you would assume they'd spend a lot of time. No,
never a positive story.
No. And then. So yeah, I think that it's everywhere. And the question is, what do the leagues themselves and the owners want to do about that? And looking at the interests of those teams and why they may not want to do anything about it. And what essentially is fair. Like, what do players need to self-advocate? Because I get it. If you think the other guy's going to be taking them, you should be taking them too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I love the series. Congratulations, ESPN Films. You guys do such wonderful work, be it back from 30 to 30, Made in America, and now this. Always innovating, always doing great work. How can people see Enhance? It's on, when does it come to ESPN Plus?
So it is on ESPN Plus right now.
Oh, great.
It went live, all 6 episodes, on July 16th. So you can go to ESPN Plus to check out all episodes.
Fantastic.
Binge them, do whatever you want.
Everybody give them a round of applause. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.